Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and the CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. These are extraordinary times, and these have been very challenging for not only those in the business community, but also the impacts of the COVID-19 situation that are being felt on our healthcare system and our economy as well. Today is the first of a series of business resiliency webinars on navigating COVID-19, and today we are going to be focused on finance and cash flow management. In this time of unprecedented uncertainty, we want to make sure that our members and the broader business community can find answers to the most pressing questions that they are facing. Through a series of free webinars, experts will provide guidance and answer questions to help companies navigate these incredibly difficult times. We encourage you to take part in this discussion. You can engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by using the hashtag GVBOT. And we are also using Slido for today's discussion, and you can submit questions through Slido by going to slido.com and entering the password GVBOT. Now, before we start, and especially in these challenging times, I want to take a couple of minutes to thank our pillar partners. They are long-standing partners, they include TELUS, CN, YVR, BCIT, and Air Canada. We are very grateful for their support, particularly at this challenging time. It's their annual partnerships and commitments that allow us to do the important work that we do. Also, a thank you to our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. Today, we are joined by Huey Lee. He is a partner with KPMG. Huey's practice involves corporate restructuring and advisory services. He acts across industries where he has led strategic planning, turnarounds, M&A, and formal restructuring proceedings. Thanks very much for joining us today, Huey. I'm going to let you kick things off. Obviously, this is a very difficult time for many businesses and struggling with a lot of challenges, particularly when they're looking at such a downturn in their revenues. Maybe you could first kick things off with us and tell us what you've been hearing from business in the last days.
Thank you, Bridget. You're right, it certainly is turbulent and unprecedented times. Over the past 5 to 10 days, my colleagues and I have probably spoken to the majority of our clients and businesses across this geography. And those businesses spanned the spectrum from small, medium, and large across all sectors, and no doubt everyone is being affected. I'd say the common themes over the last 5 to 10 days certainly is around how do I stabilize my business and how do I manage my operations in this new world and one that continues to change as headlines pop up every hour. And secondly, I think equally as important is how do I manage my employees and along with my operations. And so I think there's a lot to unfold still, but we need to take stock and do what we can as a business community to stabilize what we can in anticipation of things to come.
Just how many questions there are right now, and the situation continues to rapidly evolve. So let's start off first with one of the largest, biggest priorities that we're hearing from business is taking a look at that cash flow. How often should they be reviewing these scenarios? What's your recommendation?
Well, I'd say, given the unprecedented times, your cash flow in many respects becomes your operating kind of Bible in some sense. It's not a matter of how often do I need to refresh it, but I think it's something that you're constantly reviewing, updating, tweaking, and adjusting, given the kind of the dynamics and the headlines that keep coming in. I think
so. Sorry, go ahead, Huey.
I was going to say it's a smart practice and a good practice to make sure that you've got a good line of sight to your receipts, your disbursements, and kind of the understanding of constraints and where you can toggle and be nimble.
So let's talk about being nimble then. Where are some of those areas that organizations can look to shore up their cash flow and the expenditures that perhaps I think there's a lot of obvious ones that they're discretionary, but where could they be making some cuts right now in order to reserve what they have?
I think our general advice these days is around, making sure that every dollar that goes out the door hopefully results in more than a dollar coming back. We have to be pretty surgical, clinical, disciplined in terms of how you're managing your cash and the availability that you might have coming down the line. So I'd say, certainly discretionary spend is an easy place to start, but that can only take you so far. After that, the large costs, depending on the business and the sector you're in, are probably your people and your space. So you need to be pretty agile and flexible and open to potentially making some pretty hard decisions.
And we'll talk about those in a few minutes, but first maybe talk about where you have access to additional cash. Or is this a time when businesses should be looking at accessing their line of credit?
I'd say it's a case-by-case scenario. Certainly you need to be proactive, get in front of your lenders. The discussions we've been having with businesses and lenders in the community is such that lenders are generally going to be quite accommodating at this point. We're all in this together. And lenders are very understanding of the situation. And if there's ever time to test a relationship, it's probably now. Not just with your lenders, but with your other stakeholders as well. Lenders have been quite accommodating with borrowers who've been proactive, who've been in front of them, reaching out, talking about the challenges, and certainly there are common themes around all sectors and businesses. And I think the other funding source these days will be, the role that government's going to be playing in some of the announcements they've made in the last few days.
And some of those measures are still rolling out. I thought what was of great interest when the federal government, when they made the announcement around the $82 billion aid package, was indicating that there are more measures to come as they understand the impact of these measures getting into place. And yet still we're also waiting for the BC government to make some announcements that would augment or complement some of those measures from Ottawa. So understanding that is still a fluid situation and that there are some measures that are going to be announced in the coming days and weeks. The programs that were announced this week for businesses, maybe talk to us about what kind of help and support that gives to business, and maybe some ideas about what would be most helpful for them to be able to access.
There's no doubt that there has to be a mechanism for liquidity to reach those that need it most, and that's businesses, employees, and people. What we're seeing is certainly the government announcements. You've seen that BDC and EDC have been tasked with deploying some of this capital. It's early days. BDC has come out with some general guidance in terms of what they'd like to see from potential borrowers who are needing access to these facilities. You can imagine kind of the task they have at hand in terms of deploying that amount of money into the system and the infrastructure that they have. But certainly it'd be a good practice to follow their guidelines and do what you can in terms of preparing a package that's going to be as efficient and economical for them to process. We know that BDC is active. They are reviewing applications, and they're starting to issue term sheets and fund.
And how important is it then for businesses to be both reactive right now by accessing some of the programs that the federal government has announced and what the provincial government may announce, but also being proactive and getting out and speaking to lenders, to clients, to customers, to some of their supply chain providers?
Yeah, I think in addition to getting in front of your lenders, it's going to be very important to get in front of your other major stakeholders. And often those can be landlords, for example. You'll probably have seen in the headlines that landlords are being quite accommodating as well, understanding that their tenants are also going through tough times, and to the extent that they can accommodate through deferrals and other creative types of solutions, what we've seen in the market is that they are generally accommodating. In addition to landlords, certainly your employees and the communications to your employees around how they can seek additional government assistance is top of mind for many, many employers. Depending on the sector, you have seen that there have been some drastic cuts and layoffs and measures taken around, for example, hospitality, tourism, and entertainment. So more to come from the government in that regard, but certainly you would have seen the headline that there were about 500,000 applicants just in the last 4 days taking up on the government's EI incentives.
And I think it's those kinds of programs that are going to be really, really important for organizations. And the other thing that you were talking about that they could be doing is looking at whatever payments that they can defer, and knowing that there is more guidance coming from both the federal government and the BC government in the coming days. But there are payments that can be deferred right now that will help shore up that immediate cash flow.
I would say, to my earlier point around every dollar that goes out has to, before it goes out, hopefully come back in at least more than $1, and it has to be for forward-facing activities. I think most stakeholders will generally understand the circumstances, and to the extent that you need to stretch payables, no one's going to be surprised. No one's going to be surprised by the bad news, perhaps, that any business is going to have to announce to their stakeholders. So I'd take the opportunity to be proactive and get in front of your stakeholders and stay, not just once, but stay in touch with them as this all evolves. Certainly, I think with the government announcements that should be coming in the next few days, we'll have some more clarity around just what kind of stimulus or relief government will be announcing specifically for certain sectors and small and medium businesses in particular. They're the backbone of our economy here.
And recognizing that we have a lot of businesses from across a wide spectrum of industries and sectors who might be listening or watching to this webinar. For some of them, managing that supply chain is really important, and looking at significant disruptions in the supply chain. So when we're looking at inventory management, what are some recommendations that you could make that businesses could be looking at right now?
I think in particular, if you're talking about supply chain, and to the extent that you are expecting machinery, equipment, or inventory from overseas, certainly there'll be suppliers that are going to think twice about shipping or manufacturing or sending their goods over. We know that there are programs in place, and ones that existed, frankly, prior to this pandemic that are in place. For example, the EDC has a very good product around standby LCs. I think we should wait to hear in the coming days in terms of what that structure is going to look like, but we're aware and we're hearing that there'll probably be tools and solutions out there, such as putting together standby letters of guarantee that are going to be a bit more relaxed than you typically see in a normal commercial environment, but effectively providing some guarantees or insurance to those companies that have suppliers overseas or otherwise that can rely on the standby LC in the event a company cannot pay their debts as they become due.
I'm going to switch now to some of the questions that we have coming in on Slido. And Huey, you mentioned about the need to be proactive. So how can businesses prove that they are being proactive? I think that, for some companies, they might feel like they need to actually show, be able to prove that. So what are some ways that you might recommend that they're showing that kind of activity?
I'd say that if you haven't already been in regular contact with your lender, now is a good time to pick up the phone, and if for nothing else, just to reach out and say, hey, we'll let you know how we're doing. We may have some requests coming up, kind of under the no surprises rule. Hey, here's a heads up of something we might be thinking about. Obviously, we're doing our scenario planning and our cash flow projections, but there could be an ask. So don't be surprised if we reach out to you in the next few days or weeks requesting some kind of either relief, extension of credit, or otherwise. And I think often what you're seeing is the lenders will probably be quite, from what we've heard anyway, they are quite accommodating, they're receptive. It's better to hear something from their borrowers than nothing. And at the same time, they probably have some insight into how some of the government programs are working as well, such as with BDC and EDC. I expect that they'll be working together closely and coming up with solutions to help their borrowers.
An interesting, one of the questions here is about capital investments. For a lot of businesses, that's really been a great tool for them, particularly when you see what's happened in the markets up until very recently. So are all capital investments a bad idea right now?
I wouldn't say so. It really depends on your business, and it depends then on that forecast. I think you've got to put together a projection of what the next 6 months could look like. And if making capital investments is key to bringing in more revenue into your business, then that's something that you may not want to delay. It really depends on the business and the sector, and it depends on what kind of capital improvements you're thinking of doing.
You mentioned projections for 6 months. I think that might be tough for a lot of small and medium businesses who are really having a hard time seeing beyond 90 days. I mean, what is the optimum time frame for them to be doing some forecasting?
That's a good question. The guidance we're getting certainly from BDC is that they want to see what the gap could look like over the next 6 months. And the different scenarios include, is it a partial shutdown, a full shutdown? Just exactly what does that look like in terms of the liquidity need? Because that's going to form the basis of the credit application that you're going to make. So as I say, I don't think any lenders are going to be surprised at this point in terms of, there's certainly a need. Everyone knows that. So if you've got an opportunity to make an ask, you probably want to make it a good ask and make sure that it covers everything that you're going to need over at least a 6-month period until we have better line of sight in terms of how this is all unfolding.
Well, and given this is such a fluid situation and does continue to evolve, I think one of those really important tenets of crisis management is to ensure that you are regularly communicating. So your point about being proactive and no surprises is a really good one. There's a question here about the federal aid package announced this week, the $82 billion that was announced just a couple of days ago. And the question is, well, is it going to be enough? And I'll again reiterate that we are awaiting word from the BC government and the measures that they're going to take to augment what Ottawa has announced. And the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have both said that there could be more coming and that they're prepared to do more. So Huey, when you're looking at what that aid package was, are you seeing that there's some gaps there and that more might need to be done?
I think there's no doubt, and I think the government recognizes that there more needs to be done, and quite frankly, they are in the process of putting those sector-specific type packages together, working together with provincial government and other government bodies in terms of developing the policies and the mechanisms to get that liquidity out to the people that need it most. I think that was probably just an initial kind of amount to help, in these early days, try to stabilize what we're seeing in the economy. There's no doubt that 82 billion, although it's a big number, the more important piece is how you get that $82 billion out. How quickly can you get that out? And I think that's a constraint right now. The only mechanism out there to get money into the hands of the people that need it is through our financial institutions. So I think there's more to be done. There's more coming in terms of that sector-specific relief and just how our financial institutions and related government entities are going to get that liquidity into the hands of the businesses and people that need it most.
A very good point, Huey, and certainly I know discussions that your firm and you have been having, and the Board of Trade that we've been having, is that we are seeing some of those payments and some of those funds being able to get to businesses fairly quickly, but about getting to individuals, there is a bit of a lag, and certainly that's a concern, and the federal government is going to have to address that, and to do that has to convene Parliament to pass some legislation. So certainly, speaking on behalf of the business community and you on behalf of your clients, we are relaying that information to government to let them know to be able to reduce any delay as much as possible. I'll move ahead to another question here about withholding the submission of deductions of GST to the CRA. So what do you recommend that then? Do you think that's the fastest way to access some government support?
I don't know if withholding your submissions is connected to getting government support. I think certainly the government has made announcements in terms of relief around taxes. I think more needs to be done. We'll see in terms of specifics, but certainly around the filing of income taxes and payment of corporate income tax and personal income taxes, that's been announced. We'll see what the government says, if anything, around potentially withholding taxes, and certainly, you know, all of those amounts go to help with the cash flow. But I think we need to wait to see what the government says specifically around anything around withholding taxes per se.
And it is a triage effect, if you will, because looking to see what the most immediate and biggest priorities that can be done, but also following the guidelines as well, and in the order that they're coming out. I mean, I would say that that would be an important rule of thumb for businesses to follow. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that. I think we've got to kind of work within the parameters and the policies that we have, recognizing that these are very uncertain times. So folks are getting a bit innovative and creative in terms of what solutions are out there, and I think some of the questions that are being asked are good questions, and ones that government and other stakeholders need to have a view on.
So a question here about receivables. Is there anything that business can do to expedite their receivables?
Again, I think that's probably a case by case basis. I think that that largely depends on what contractual arrangements you may have with your customers, but also the relationships you have with your customers. This is all part of that proactive communication with all your stakeholders, including customers. Certainly, we've seen some businesses, in an effort to shore up liquidity and accelerate the collection of the receivables, will give discounts, for example, if for no other reason, just to get cash in the door. So that's certainly one consideration, but you need to, I guess, take that decision in conjunction with the rest of your business. It really depends on how much liquidity you have, the runway you have, the cushion that you have, and then that kind of drives what how aggressive you might want to get or have to get in order to bring cash in the door.
You're part of a global firm of KPMG, and so there's a question here from somebody about it. What are your thoughts on how Vancouver businesses are faring compared to other competitor cities? And this is maybe more anecdotal than anything that is scientifically based, but are you hearing from some of your colleagues around the globe around the impact, and any comparative stories or anecdotes that you can share, or even across Canada, frankly?
I think across Canada, it's largely the same sentiment, given that our economy is kind of all interconnected, at least in the Canadian sense. Certainly, in other geographies who have either gone, maybe I'd say who've gone through this a bit earlier than us, you're seeing that it really depends. It depends on what their economy is based on. Is it a largely manufacturing economy or a services-based economy? There's no kind of one size fits all type of outcome here. And everyone's kind of dealing with this real time. I can't say that there's any kind of broad brush statements I can make around how other countries are faring from an economic perspective, compared to ours at the moment.
I think probably one thing that is true is we keep hearing over and over that we are all in this together. This is a global crisis, and the impact might be felt differently, as you say, Huey, but it is certainly being felt right across the globe. To the point that we were talking about earlier about what a rapidly evolving situation this is. Just before we started this webinar, the City of Vancouver announced a 60-day grace period from property tax payments for business. Do you think we can expect these kinds of measures to be extended beyond the 60 days? Give me your thoughts on that.
I imagine that'd be the case. I think governments, federal right down to municipal, are dealing with all of this real time, and they're waiting to see, how other government bodies react as well. And we know that they're also in communication with each other. We know that there are lobby groups out there that are very active for certain sectors, making sure that their voices,
including the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade.
Absolutely. So I think it's because it's such a fluid and real-time decision-making process. I think in terms of our members and businesses here, we have to do what we can to stabilize the business as quickly as we can to the best of our ability. And then unfortunately, we got to wait a bit to see how government steps up to get that liquidity into the hands of businesses.
Thanks very much for that, Huey. And I see a couple of questions here that I'm going to combine in one, because we've got people asking about, what exactly are the programs that have been offered by, and it says federal and provincial programs. Right now, we've only heard from the federal government. And then another question about requirements to pay staff if business is closed. And there are specific programs that have been announced in the $82 billion aid package. And rather than put you on the spot and get you to speak about any of them specifically or individually, I would encourage people to go to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade's resource page and to take a close look at all of those measures to figure out so that there are details there. And I would also say that because this is a fluid situation and there's more measures being rolled out all the time, including the one from the City of Vancouver just a few minutes ago. Huey, maybe what I'll get is more of a broader statement from you about these measures, and maybe if there's one or two that really stand out for you that could be most helpful for small and medium businesses. Yeah,
I think all of the relief and all of the programs that are being announced have to be considered, and each business will have its own requirements and needs. So yes, spend the time to do the diligence to find out what's available. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, certainly if the cash flow projection and your cash position has to be kind of a priority at this point. And it'll be the roadmap for how you decide to operate or how you can operate in a constrained environment over the next 30, 60, 90 days and up to 6 months. I do think that it's important that you prepare the cash flow projections on an objective basis, on a very disciplined basis, paying very close attention to those payments that absolutely have to be made. And once you determine what the gap is, I think the next best thing to do is to start looking at those particular funding sources, whether it is BDC, EDC, other government programs, but reach out to your lenders and work closely with them as well. I have no doubt that the lenders will be working closely with the government agencies in terms of getting the liquidity deployed.
Thanks. There's a question here about what the BC government should do. And there's a couple that come to mind because we have been speaking to the provincial government about this, but one about a deferral of the employer health tax, for example. And also the question that somebody was asking about paying staff, some more clarity or some guidance through the employment standards, the BC Employment Standards Act. Are there other measures that the BC government could be thinking of to augment the aid package that Ottawa recently announced?
I don't have any specific knowledge around what the BC government might be doing in this regard, but anything from a policy perspective that augments what the federal government is doing can only help. So I'd say whether it's injecting additional liquidity or making accommodations and relief through deferral of, say, PST or other types of taxes, that all helps as well.
Anything that sort of gives that buffer of 90 days or longer, so that businesses can just protect cash as much as possible. That's what you're saying.
That's right. I think the immediate term, it's around stabilizing our businesses, doing what we can to stabilize it. We'll come out on the other end. The question is, how long will it take, and how much funding will it take between now and then? So I'd say control what you can, be disciplined in your cash management, be proactive with those funding sources, particularly if you need your lenders or you need to augment those current lending sources with others, and take it. I think that's a good start.
And really a good question here from somebody asking how flexible they should be on their receivables as their business partners reach out for grace periods on collecting debt. So a little bit maybe the flip side of that coin, if you will. And so how flexible should businesses be?
In terms of repaying their own debt?
So the question is, how flexible should I be on my receivables as business partners reach out for grace periods on
Right.
collecting debt?
Yeah,
Yes.
no, that's a good question, because as you're doing the same thing in terms of trying to
Exactly.
make, negotiate with your own stakeholders, others will be doing the same with you. I think it depends. It really depends on how critical those stakeholders are to your operations, or what you think your operations will be in the immediate term, and can they help generate positive cash flow. If delaying, a debt repayment to you somehow helps them and helps you in the longer term, then that might be a consideration that you make as a business.
And it's far, far too early probably to ask some of these questions about how long this could last or what it's going to look like coming out. But is there any kind of lesson that can be learned and applied later when we come out of the other side of this crisis about how companies could be better prepared to repay debt?
I think so. We're coming off a protracted period of growth, and a lot of that growth has been funded by a lot of cheap credit and debt. And certainly, I think to the extent we're facing kind of a crisis like this, it really brings into focus some of those large debts that are now having, they're facing some trouble being serviced. So I have no doubt that one day that there'll be many case studies and things that we can learn from today.
And again, it's too early to contemplate recovery when we're in the middle of a crisis. But when we look at recovery, and a lot of people are wondering, well, how do we recover? I think it's too soon to know, because we really are, we don't know where we are in this spectrum, if you will.
I think that's right, but I think fundamentally, our economy is founded on solid tenets. There's no doubt that we will get through this, and we will have a thriving economy on the other end. In the face of the uncertainty, though, I know that a lot of businesses and clients are just a bit at a loss in terms of what to do. This is uncharted territory. So again, I think the best thing you can do is control what you can, and do the best you can to stabilize, but at the same time, be very proactive. Get in front of those funding sources and those stakeholders who you think can help.
And I think that's probably a good place to end the conversation. I can see that there's other questions that are really getting quite specific around some employment standards and things. And so I would say to people that hang on, because our next webinars will cover other topics as well. And Huey, I do really want to keep you focused on some of the issues that we've been talking about, cash flow. So give me your top 2 tips for businesses right now, what they should be doing around cash flow.
Put together a 13-week cash flow, really understand the disbursements that you have to make, model out scenarios for what a potential partial or full shutdown might look like, and find out not only how much funding you're going to need, but when, and then get on the phone with your lenders and other stakeholders and try to come up with a solution that gets you as much of that gap covered. And then I would say don't be shy about reaching out to your lenders and asking for more.
Huey, thank you. Really important advice, and I really do appreciate your time today. The webinar has been recorded and is going to be available on the boardoftrade.com website. And we're going to continue this important conversation and discussions over the coming days. And we're going to be hosting a series of free webinars on navigating the COVID-19 situation. Lots of questions were coming in on other topics, and so we will be addressing those in the coming days. And particularly up next, we will be in the next few days talking about accessing government resources and support, which is very key for many businesses, and understanding that there are more measures coming from government, and also human resources management, which is key, looking after the employees that you have. And so we have also created a page on our website with all of the resources that we are getting from the federal government and from the city and from the provincial government. And so for the most up-to-date information, I encourage you to visit boardoftrade.com, and we will continue to update that resource page as more information becomes available. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar, and we look forward to connecting again soon. And if I can leave you with some last words, I would like to echo the words of Dr. Bonnie Henry, our Provincial Medical Health Officer. Be kind, be calm, and be safe.